This episode is brought to you by Cartamax. Life on the front line requires you step up your game. Owned and operated by former Navy SEAL Sean Matson, Cartamax has designed just the right supplements for you and is offering American Party an exclusive offer. Buy one, get one free in your first order. Go to Cartamax.com and use the promo code American. That's Cartamax.com, helping you achieve your max.
Well, Dakota is learning how to read today because he can't read. And his department, those of you who follow the show know he's a firefighter, EMT guy. His department has been tired of him filling out his reports in crayon. So he's now learning how to write with a pen and also how to read and write in general. So finally, we're going to get something coherent out of this asshole for the first time in his adult life. He's not a doctor, although he has been writing prescriptions. So I don't know what to tell you about that. Also, before we get started with the bulk of this show here, this is going to be a pretty serious one. Got a special guest today. Before we get started, I just want to point out this book right back here, The Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. It's one of my favorite military history books written lately. It just captures a very interesting scenario with the bombing campaigns that helped win World War II. If you didn't see the show that we did with him and discussed it, I recommend you go back and watch that as well and read the book. I just remember that because I see it behind me on the screen here. Anyways, today we've got a man named Solo. We have blacked him out a little bit because he does a lot of behind-the-scenes operations, investigations, and so on and so forth. Excuse me, into a topic that I know that you guys are super interested in, and one that we've discussed quite a bit on this show, which is child sex trafficking. So before we get into all that, let's discuss some of your other experiences, because you've got a pretty eclectic background, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And you've worked for a number of Fortune 500 companies and individuals directly who run some of those companies. One of them that stands out, obviously, is Kanye West. Yeah. So tell me how that happened.
Kanye. Interesting.
Yeah, of course.
He's not what everyone thinks he is, that's for sure.
What would you say everyone thinks he is?
Completely irrational, completely unhinged, maybe baseless in a lot of the things that he comes up with. But he's actually quite measured, very, very intentional.
Well, what did Arthur C. Clarke say? A technology, a sufficiently advanced technology would look like magic to someone who doesn't understand, right?
Yeah.
It's
a great quote.
It is, yeah. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But, yeah, Kanye's I think everybody knows at this point that he's a marketing genius, at least.
Sure. And interestingly, that comes from his truth. He doesn't think necessarily marketing. He thinks, what do I want to tell the people? You know, how am I feeling? What am I channeling here?
Right, of course. But that's what true genius really is, in my opinion.
For sure.
I was thinking about this actually yesterday when we were talking. Brittany's in the room there. My lady's in the room, so be careful what you say. Just kidding. She needs a doctor's note from Dakota. So we're making some fake prescriptions. They're not to be used for real stuff, by the way, guys. So don't get yourself in trouble. Anyways, when we were talking yesterday, while we were walking our dogs in the park, letting them run around and try to join other people's groups. I don't know. These dogs are assholes. But we were just talking about how some people are, maybe we didn't use the phrase, but some people are savants at certain things. Like an architect sees things three-dimensionally. They're able to see the building in their head and draw it out, right?
Sure.
A painter is able to see the picture that they want to paint before they even start. A great photographer, the same way. They could see what they're looking for. Like you see this whole image, and they're just seeing this one spot.
Yeah, visualization.
Right. And a writer, I would imagine, particularly a great fiction writer, does the same thing. They can see the story in a linear fashion in their head in a way that other people can't. So I think that people see stuff like that and they're enamored by it, like that's amazing. almost taken aback. Like, how could that happen? My brain just doesn't work that way. Maybe not for architecture, maybe not for writing, maybe not for painting or taking photographs, but I think there is something that everybody sees, for lack of a better phrase, three-dimensionally, right?
Sure.
So what would Kanye see three-dimensionally? I think he sees how people think. Probably because he has an overactive mind, maybe a little bit autistic, maybe it's from chemicals that he imbibes. I have no idea. But
sure,
people like that who spend so much time in their own head learn to figure out how other people think, whether they realize they're doing it or not. I think that's one of my best skills, and it comes through in everything they do.
Sure.
So you're like, man, that guy really he's just really lucky, or he really understands.
Right.
Maybe it's a combination of the two, but I think find what you're good at three-dimensionally.
Yeah, that's a great observation.
One thing you're really good at is, and it's something that I'm really good at as well, is looking at two maybe unremarkable and unrelated things and seeing something remarkable when you put them together, right? And that's the hallmark of a great investigator, right?
Sure.
And that's what you're doing
as
now.
well. Yeah. Yeah. And with Kanye, I mean, I'm always cautious. I consider him a friend, someone I respect. He's very sensitive about anyone speaking for him or any perception of opinion about him that may not be his own. So I had a conversation recently with someone in Europe, nobility, who was talking about my relationship with Kanye, and he was referencing it in reference to Elon, because they're friends. And he said, I think Elon is probably one of the highest IQ individuals, able to see from an engineering perspective how things come together. But
right.
Kanye is on the EQ. He's probably a very high EQ. And
EQ, you mean emotionally intelligent?
Yes.
Yeah. Understanding how people think, for sure. Even
how they feel. He's
right, yeah.
very
like an empath almost, right?
Sure,
yeah.
Exactly. He's highly empathic, and part of the psychosis that is perceived by Kanye about his kind of irrationale is he processes a ton of emotion. He feels everyone's emotion, and he doesn't necessarily have the greatest skill set to articulate it, and so it comes out as a rant. It comes out in a lot of different types of communication styles, which is perfect for him as a rapper, because if you really listen to his lyrics and his bars, they are very personal to him, and so that again, I could say, looking at him from the outside and doing research on him before I went into his camp, I was still confused about a lot of aspects.
Right.
But after spending a few weeks with him, it made sense to me. I kind of had the codes, as he kind of quoted. He said, wherever you go, you get the codes.
Yeah.
So,
just getting the codes. That's a good way to put that. So wherever you go, you just get the codes. That's almost like, what that immediately reminded me of is Joe Pantaleone in The Matrix, looking at the screen with all the numbers, but because they're trained in that, they can actually see it. That's something interesting, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's. I don't know if you call it talent or skill. I think it might be a combination. I mean, the way I would personally define a talent is something that you're naturally good at. A skill is something that you develop, right?
Sure.
And I don't think you can, obviously you need both. If you're some people are really good at stuff and you see him do it and you're like, man, if he just applied himself at it, he'd be great at it. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I think Kanye is let himself kind of slide into the darkness from time to time to get a better grasp on that. And it's dangerous. I mean, he talks about it in some of his songs about depression and suicidal thoughts and shit like that.
Right.
And I've done it myself before. Sometimes I used to do this all the time. I would go on an MDMA bender, drain all of the fucking serotonin out of my body, and then stop cold turkey and just let myself slide into depression and then start writing stuff.
Wow. Because
you feel it's raw. Like those blocks that are in place to keep you from feeling negative shit are gone now. So you have to face it. There's no other option at that point.
Sure. Well, and I think with Kanye, there's a good probability that he has just some brain chemistry that is on a higher level than everyone else. And if you've seen some of his stage conversation speeches, performances about abortion in the last year, or even recently about unconditional love because of what he's going through. And he breaks down because he is a super raw emotion person. And what we're talking about today, what we're going to get into a lot deeper is trauma. And he's pretty open that he's suffered some traumas as a child. And that's definitely had an influence on his trust and how he views the world. Another thing that I'm not sure is out there, but I don't think he cares, is he is a synesthete. I don't know if you know what a synesthete is.
He can smell numbers.
Things of that
synesthesia,
nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, synesthesia.
I mean, synesthesia is where your senses get confused. So you might associate a number with a particular feeling or color or smell or something like that.
Yeah, different neurology. I think there's upwards of, they've labeled over 100 different categories of synesthesia.
Synesthesia, yeah, it's a hard word to say.
So
I've got a friend that's like that, and it's the first time she explained it to me, I'm like, you know what? That sounds a lot like some of the experiences I've had on mushrooms. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I see, but it's because, the way the brain is wired, your hippocampus is where your memories are stored, right? And your olfactory gland is operates in conjunction with it a lot. So there's a lot of crossover. That's why smell is the sense most closely associated with memory. And sometimes people's brains are either, it's a chemical thing or it's an overexertion of neurons early on. So you map those channels almost like the interstate highway system. We talked about this with Jared last week with the DMT stuff. That stuff can happen naturally as well sometimes.
Sure.
And you can either unlearn that trauma, or you can use it, or you can ignore it and it fucks you up. I mean, I think Kanye's done a little bit of all of those things. Sure. So he's a really interesting guy. And to be honest, it's hard to sit around and look at a guy that's that wealthy and be like, oh, he's really sacrificing. But it is. I've been through a lot of that mental anguish from those particular stimulus, and they're not fun.
Yeah.
So we see it a lot with rich people too, especially those people who are like tortured. So, what's her name? The woman that makes bags and shoes and clothes and shit. The fuck was her name? Kate Spade killed herself.
Yeah.
Bourdain killed himself. Fucking all these musicians, actors.
Allegedly.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? There's some kind of Bourdain situation? I've never heard a thing about him.
Well, he was connected to a conversation around releasing information around trafficking.
Right.
And
people thought that Chester Bennington was as well, but that turned out to not be true. But I have heard that Bourdain was involved in some anti-sex trafficking stuff.
Well, Bennington and Cornell were collaborating on a documentary that was going to come out against trafficking. So if you're not aware of that one, that is another rabbit hole of.
Yeah, well, I've looked into some of that stuff. I mean, it's pretty wild. Obviously, I don't think any reasonable person believes that Jeffrey Epstein killed himself.
No.
Right? At this point.
No. I mean, there's a lot of narratives active, hundreds, thousands possibly, and the way I approach all of them is make note of them. Don't get over revved on any one particular, but don't discount or discard anything either, because you might miss something.
Well, I mean, science and the Socratic method in general is, I think, can be most aptly surmised as "we'll see," right?
Sure. That's good.
I mean, we'll see. No, right? We 100 years ago, or I guess 130 years ago, we didn't really know what cells were.
Right.
Right? Now we know. I mean, there were theories about it from a couple hundred years ago, but we couldn't prove it. Then we could prove it. Every generation has its new scientific breakthroughs, and it's not just physics or math. It's sociology. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I would just say, we'll see. Right? There was that issue with the cop last week. Somebody found a video, excuse me, of a police officer tossing what looked to be like a little plastic bag back into somebody's car. And they're like, we caught this cop trying to frame somebody. First of all, it was something that the person, I think they were getting pulled over for a speeding ticket. And when they opened the door, something fell out, and the cop politely picked it up and put it back in the car for them. And then I don't even think they got a ticket for speeding. and then they went away.
Sure.
But that one little clip was like, oh, see,
Right.
fucking see. Like, come on, man.
Yeah.
Just wait. We'll see.
A great example of that recently, I think there's a BJJ YouTuber whose name is Jedi, I believe. And he did a diagnosis on a viral video about a guy getting slapped in a BJJ match. And of course, everybody just thought the guy doing the slapping was just a piece of crap, you know,
You could say shit here.
unsportsmanlike. And so, okay.
You can say whatever you want here, actually.
What he did was he went back and kind of observed the whole video.
Mm-hmm.
And really what happened was the guy who did the slapping in the end had been being kind of abused through the match. And so as he
Abused? What do you mean like abused? You mean like it's...
groin shots.
like a Tyson situation where, look, I mean, biting someone's ear off is not a good solution.
No, absolutely
but
not.
Holyfield had been headbutting Tyson
Sure.
the previous match and for that entire match.
Yeah.
So it's like...
A
I mean, you
good
kind of get it.
A good open-handed slap is not a comparative to tearing
Biting somebody's ear off. No,
you
it's
know.
definitely not.
But anyway, it's just to your point, you know, taking a piece of information out of context, and when we're talking about things that are very controversial around the world right now,
Right.
we're going to get into all this stuff, and there is so much content. I mean, so much content. I mean, my global network is sending me videos and snippets daily, and filtering through all that and trying to rationalize, is this a total picture? Is it a partial picture?
Right.
Is it a manipulated picture?
Mm-hmm.
And then if I, you know, and I've been guilty of it, I'll forward it on to my network,
Mm-hmm.
and then because I'm excited, like, hey, maybe this is a
Right.
good insight here. But then after I take a deeper look at it for 10 more minutes, I'm like, shit, why did I pass that
Right, yeah, yeah.
around
I mean,
people that trust me, because
sure, yeah.
now I've got to retract that.
A great investigator spends a lot more time trying to prove themselves wrong than prove themselves right. Otherwise, your confirmation bias will run amok, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it is a truly great detective. Like when you think of a great detective, this seems kind of silly, but a lot of people think of something like Sherlock Holmes, right? Because he was not romantic about anything. He wasn't emotionally attached to the outcome as long as it was true. He was a great observer,
seeking the truth
as well. I think it's a good example. I think Arthur Conan Doyle did a really good job of showing what an investigation should look like. I mean, that is a sociological treatise on the Socratic method, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's really interesting. So there's some other stuff. There's some other stuff that you have done. You've worked for a number of other companies. Anything you want to share about any of those? I don't want to get too deep into your personal history.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what's led me to this is I'm looking at this as the biggest problem on the earth, right?
Right.
If I'm honest, it's horrific.
By this, you mean child trafficking?
Child trafficking, crimes against children, crimes against humanity, even. I mean, it's an atrocity. It's just whatever the scale of it is, it's unacceptable that it's not given the attention that it deserves in the mainstream. So the history I have is in the problem solving space. You know,
right.
Whether it's been these corporations, it's been solutions development around products, around systems, around business development. You know, and after 20 years in high stress environments and high value organizations. My track record has kind of been one of typically delivering difficult solutions. So I didn't look for this.
But the only way you can do that,
task,
the only way you can do that is if you're dispassionate, right, about the outcome. Right. The only thing that you can, I bring up.
That's a.
Well, I bring up Julius Caesar a lot on the show because I think he was one of the key disruptors in Western history, and I think that his nephew, who became Augustus, right, Octavian, realized that he had the same ego and same vices and same bullshit as everybody else, but made a conscious decision at a very young age to tie his ego to being the best at making Rome the best, right? Like that's what it wasn't about.
So he had a passion.
He was very passionate about it, but he was dispassionate about the credit. You know what I mean? He wasn't, he didn't want to build statues of himself. He wanted Rome to be free of disease and well fed. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like he understood that he was a human being, that he was fatally flawed as we all are, that he had an ego that drove him to do stuff, and that was a motivating factor. So why not turn my motivation to something that actually benefits other people, right? That's an interesting choice for the first emperor of Rome, right?
Yeah.
For somebody that had unlimited power and presided over, excuse me, I would say probably presided over the largest percentage of the population in human history at any given time. Probably at that point, right?
It's a lot of power, yeah.
It is a lot of power. And he willfully decided to do what he did. It was impressive. And I wonder now, who are those people?
That's a good point, because I do believe there is a small group of people that still reside over the population.
Yeah.
And they obviously are not putting sovereignty of humanity or children as a priority.
No, certainly not. I mean, look, we saw it with, I've talked about this book on the show before, but by the 1930s, which is, 140 years into our existence, there was already a book called America's 60 Families, detailing the 60 families that represent an aristocracy inside the United States. They were onto something then, and we've talked about Jack Mandeville, one of our buddies who has a show on the network, has spoken quite a bit about the Victorian era, where Queen Victoria was placing her bloodline in the main throughways of all the power, right, throughout Europe, which was the power of the world. At the time, it still is in a lot of ways.
Sure. Unbeknownst to most of the population.
Right, yeah. So cousins here, people here. I mean, we talk about Sangreal, royal bloodlines, and people think that it's some kind of Dan Brown novel, but this is like Queen Victoria went out of her way to do this shit, and dynasties before them had done the same.
Yes. And
we're going to get into some of that today. So,
well, and back to some of the groups I've worked with, I think the most relevant, I mean, I've reported to a few billionaires in the private industry, or public companies, I should say. I spent time in Silicon Valley with big tech, huge tech. So I have those experiences, insights as how that system works. And, I've spent the last 12 or 15 years at various touch points within JSOC and SOCOM and different agencies and DARPA. And it gave me the opportunity to kind of see how each of those puzzles can influence other puzzles in the world. And so, like an example of this, and I'm not a prior service guy, just to be disclosing of, I'm a civilian that has worked with all these different organizations. And so a lot of these groups, whether it's been command level or assaulters or cyber or human performance or bioengineering or whatever, because of the diversity of landscapes that I've been able to contribute in, a lot of times I'll get called in and asked to assess something from kind of a systems overview, and then I might be asked, how did you guys approach this in this other environment to solve this problem? And so I'll throw that template on the table and say, we looked at it this way, we pulled these areas in, and we constructed something totally unexpected.
Right.
And so with that kind of processing model in all those different environments, which kind of make up all the industries, whether it's tech or bio or soft goods or tech, it could even be energy industries, whatever it is, pharma. The templates and the patterns all kind of become the same as to how they operate and how they attack problems.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So one of the key things you get from a Series A or B round funding or acquisition isn't necessarily just the money. It's the Rolodex and the experience. Like,
right.
This stuff seems completely foreign to a lot of people, but this guy has done it already.
Sure.
And he's like, oh, all you got to do is this. You're like, oh shit, I've been trying to do this for 3 years.
Yeah.
I just did it in 2 months.
Yeah.
Fuck. So that's that experience that you have. The reason I wanted you to get into that is because it just gives people a sense of why someone like you might be able to step back and see things, I guess, in a lot of people see things in a linear way, but see things in a linear way with a lot more information, right? With a lot more organizations.
Different perspectives,
right.
Different unrelated solutions. I mean, you said earlier about like a skill you and I both have, or a talent, is seeing unrelated concepts.
Like, why not this?
Marrying them and bringing something totally new. I mean, that's innovation, as much as I dislike the word in most cases. But this problem on the earth needs innovation, and that's kind of what the guys that I've met with that have been doing it for 20 or 25 years, when we sit down and have a conversation and we look at an unorthodox point of view of it all, and they kind of go, yeah, after 25 years.
Oops, sorry.
Somebody
Somebody just sent me this.
After 25 years, I had to step out of this because it was an untenable fight. It was whack-a-mole, and it needs innovation. It needs a new kind of unorthodox approach.
The people that we remember for making these giant leaps typically aren't the first people to come up with a certain piece of technology, right? It's usually somebody who figures out, I mean, look, everybody knows who Einstein is. He was working on splitting an atom and harvesting the energy from that to power the earth.
Right.
As early, I mean, the Miracle Year papers were in 1905, right? But we didn't really see that come to fruition until the Manhattan Project, which was Oppenheimer and those guys who were like maybe a little bit more morally flexible. But even Oppenheimer wasn't thrilled about what had happened with his creation there.
Sure. And that's what we know.
Yeah.
I mean, you're referencing what we're told.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
The conventional view of that information.
Right.
So, and the longer we live, and the more things are shared on this planet, we're seeing more and more that there's always more to every story.
Of course.
Whether it's back to the people that were suicided that we touched on earlier, or technology, or historic figures. There is definitely a narrative in every example.
I mean, it's happened. If you've never read, do you have anything on the board, Delco, for Tim Wu? Is there a... There we go. Yeah. Well, that was... I actually liked it with the music playing. Do you do it with both? Is that possible? Wow, that's actually really good. We're going to need you to combine that and turn it into a new switch on the board there. But yeah, Tim Wu wrote a book called The Master Switch that I think you and I talked about yesterday. I've talked about quite a bit on this show. I encourage everyone to read it because it kind of it demonstrates all the examples, probably not even all, just all the examples we know about through human history where governments have seized or manipulated technology created by private industry for their own benefit in some way or another, right?
Sure.
Whether it be airplanes, the printing press, Western Union, financial institutions, and now the internet, social media companies and stuff like that. It's nothing new. It's been going on for as long as things have been going on.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
I mean, we talk about the Dark Ages, the Catholic Church and the governments that were beholden to them were able to shut down science for 1,000 years almost. Like, where would we be today had the Dark Ages not occurred? I mean, it's who knows, right?
Yeah. Well, there's some crazy, interesting YouTube channels out there that get into other versions of history.
Right.
And the more I observe those, the more I question a lot more than I ever realized, But again, discernment and not getting sucked into another rabbit hole of irrationale or something that's not verifiable on any level is to be avoided.
Well, you
of
have
course,
to you have to be measured in how you introduce new information to people.
Right.
If you do it the way that Alex Jones does, for example, where you introduce a new idea and you give all of the points at once, whether it's in a linear fashion or not, that's a lot for people to digest.
Very much so. Yeah.
That's not to say that you should hide the truth from people, but there's a way. You don't teach a child multiplication by giving them the hardest possible problem at first, right? You teach them the fundamental skills so they can understand the complicated stuff.
Progression, yeah.
And we're not doing a very good job of that right now, but it's because nobody's actually interested in the truth or not. They're just interested in whatever will get them votes or get them money, right? It's politics is all about money and power. So,
yeah. Well, and you started to go into a little bit about solving and about people that represent great solutions, great thinkers. I'm just here to be a catalyst. I'm here for a long list of reasons. This was put on kind of on my lap to dive into. Why I'm not front and center on this is I'm not making it about me. I don't want it to be about me. If this thing gets elevated to the level that I hope through these conversations and through going to these government leadership organizations that are global, not national, then, and if every one of your, the people that are watching this or listening to this start having these conversations with everyone in their circles, and it becomes as mainstream as possible.
Right.
And if a whole population, if the entire species is questioning the viability of what's being presented, because it's 100% happening. All of these things are 100% happening.
Well, we know there's at least, on the low end, 46 million people in slavery today. We believe, based on the data, that the low end for sub-18 children is somewhere between 15 and 20 million children today.
Yeah,
that's 2021. And it's not all in sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
It's here.
No, and I mean, if we take your low number and take it at 10 million, let's just say minors under 18, Austin metro area where we are, 2 million humans. So 5 Austins full of sub-18-year-olds.
Right.
That's the amount of people in some form of exploitation, sexploitation, slavery, whether it's work slavery, whether it's, just routine abuses in a house, all the way to the extreme of blood drinkers, and satanic kind of rituals. Even if that's 100 kids on this earth, it should not be disregarded. It should not be discarded as a viable conversation.
Certainly not.
And so my point in all this is, don't cancel information just because it's uncomfortable or it's not widespread or it's not happening in the house next door.
Right. There
is a high likelihood that a house that you can see from wherever you live or an apartment on your floor or condo, somebody's being abused in it.
Right.
It is that prolific on this earth. And that is just as impactful. I mean, it's more impactful in my opinion than any pandemic that we've living
because it's generational, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's the amount of people who molest children, for example, the rate at which they have previously been abused, I believe, is somewhere in like the 85 to 87% range. So the vast majority of people who abuse children when they get older were abused as children, right?
Yeah.
So this isn't something that we talk about super spreader events. I can't think of a more dangerous one than one that affects the life of a child that's going to exist on this planet with the ability to continue spreading that for the rest of their lives for 70 years.
In every circle.
Yes.
And then in every circle that they influence with their trauma, it perpetuates it. I mean, that's a great point.
Well, I mean, it's a multiplying effect. So what we know is that it's happening, and it's happening in a large way. And then we know that the only time anybody becomes, when I say anybody, I mean anybody in actual power, becomes motivated to do something about anything at all, it's if they think it's going to purchase them some kind of social equity or political equity or actual money, right? One of those three things. So the goal for this conversation and all these conversations, people keep asking me, you've exposed all this shit that's happening. What are you doing about it? The exposing it is what you do about it, at first, at least.
The normalizing of this conversation so that everyone is looking for it.
Because at some point, a critical mass is reached, and the politicians and leaders and et cetera can no longer avoid the conversation. They can no longer hide that their friends and colleagues are up to no good. Right. And that policy has failed and so on and so forth. So
yeah, how much money is the government or is every government spending on fighting this front and center? Because it's not front and center. During the pandemic, pick your media channel, pick your CNBC, CNN, Fox, it doesn't really matter. Majority of them are running some kind of COVID ticker.
Right, yeah.
And so...
But they changed what the number is based on whatever the most frightening thing is, right? So it started with infection rate, then it went to deaths, then it went back to infections, then it went to a percentage of increase.
Sure.
Even though it was like 1,000% more people got infected today. So it was 1 yesterday and 1,000 today. Cool.
Right. Yeah.
It's still not that much. So let's...
Well, imagine if they did that with trafficking or human trafficking, adults or children, or crimes against children, or
just a constant
abuses,
ticker on the bottom that says this is the amount of people we believe are currently in slavery or abusive situations. This is the amount of them that are children. Here are the amount that we think died just today.
Sure.
That'd be relevant information to put up.
If that was on every media outlet as a global crisis, then every human is now talking about it at the dinner table. Every human is looking in the park at a kid that's running around. Where's an adult that goes with that kid? Whatever it is, on a subway, everyone's awareness is increased and everyone's kind of alert levels is heightened. And by not having it spoken about or front and center, people, it's not my business.
Well, somebody was doing YouTube videos about it a couple of weeks ago. They set up camera on a street corner and had a child walking, right? I don't remember if it was their child or one of their friends' kids or something like that, but they would run up, grab the kid, like snatch him up, the kid's yelling, and people would just walk by and not even give them a second look.
And run into an alley or something.
Yeah.
And then the people would just kind of maybe look, maybe ignore it, and just continue on. And even if, so again, back to us talking about discernment of snippets of information. Even if he did that all day and only 20 people ignored it and 50 people reacted, which is great. I would imagine there would be something like that. That's still 20 people, ignoring it.
I mean,
it should be no people ignoring it. And if this was a normal, everyday conversation that we all had in every circle, and again, it's not uplifting, it's not positive, and that's probably why it's not a common conversation. But if it was, at least instead of being disregarded or discounted or avoided, I think it would change a lot of the number impacts.
For sure, yeah. I mean, the problem is, I think the presentation. A lot of people started talking about this when Epstein finally got exposed en masse. I mean, look, Alex Jones exposed him in 2013, but once he finally got exposed to the rest of the country, a lot of people I think a lot of people on the right, especially, made the mistake of trying to juxtapose child trafficking versus everything else that's happening, right? Like, I understand that. I truly believe this is the real pandemic because, like I said, it's generational. This stuff doesn't last 2 or 3 years and then taper off. It lasts forever.
Yeah.
Right? Because
it's been going on forever.
They just keep making new ones through the cycle of abuse. But the whataboutism, like, the left would be talking about whatever, climate change. Like, well, what about this? I don't think it's a great argument to be made to compare the two. But I do think, and the reason we're here talking about this today, you can start to make that argument when the clearly more dangerous of the situations is being completely ignored for political reasons or for reasons we don't know, right? Which would probably be
agendas,
protecting people's friends or some kind of power struggle that's happening or whatever.
Sure.
So before we get into the rest of this, I'm going to go ahead and do some sponsors here. We are sponsored by just GhostBed today, ghostbed.com. /DrinkItBros. Best bed company in the world. 36 months pay as you go. I got the cooling mattress. I got the Ghost Lux. I'm going to upgrade soon to the Matrix, 3D Matrix. They've got the new mattress toppers that are made out of the same material. They are great. The pillows are my favorite. They got the mattress protector. And the reason we love this company so much is because before the pandemic, they gave a 30% off lifetime discount to anybody that's ever served in the military, police officers, firefighters, etc. Once the pandemic happened, they expanded that to nurses and teachers. It says something about a company that is a good steward of their community. A company that doesn't have to, but decides to spend a portion of their profits on taking care of the people who take care of them. So we really appreciate those guys. We're glad they're on the show. We've also got, I guess I can do these other two. We got Amazon Music is a new sponsor on the show. You're going to hear him again on Friday. On this show, you're going to hear him on some of our other ones. I've been using Amazon Music for years. They've got millions of free podcasts to listen to. I like the way they build playlists. I can search for an artist, like Lamb of God's one of my favorite bands. Search for Lamb of God. Click on the channel or the station, whatever you want to call it, and then it'll give me different bands that are like that. Or if I hear a song from a genre that I'm not really familiar with, I can go to that band's channel or station, and it'll expose me to a bunch of different music like that. Like maybe I like some more of it. It's not easy to find new music. Like, what do you search for? Like, new music. And then a bunch of weird-ass bullshit from people's basements pops up. Right. They've got over 75 million songs on Amazon Music Unlimited. That's what I use. You can listen to any song, anywhere, offline, with unlimited skips. That's what I do. I always I download my playlists. So when I don't have the internet. So that's what I like doing. So if you've never tried Amazon Music Unlimited, now's a great time to do it. They got a special deal going on for a limited time. New customers can try Amazon Music Unlimited free for 30 days. No credit card required. Just go to Amazon.com/American Party. That is Amazon.com/American Party to try Amazon Music Unlimited free for 30 days. Amazon.com/American Party. It does renew automatically, but you can cancel anytime. There's no contract, and terms do apply, so check those out. All right. Back to the meat and potatoes. So a summary of why you're here and why you do what you do, why you've done some other shows, is why aren't crimes against children worldwide as important to the powers that be as things like pandemic or climate change, etc.? I think the obvious answer is that it's twofold. They're probably, some of them are hiding shit, and the rest are waiting for public outcry, right? Like there's a lot of power in being able to speak the truth openly and in mass, right? It's the emperor's clothes, right? People will accept. They'll accept a lie as long as everybody else does, as long as they're not challenged on it, and nobody will fight harder to defend a lie than somebody that's wasted their entire lives believing it.
That's a great point.
So,
I mean, we're living. You say public outcry. I mean, we're seeing protests worldwide of millions in opposition to what's going on with the pandemic. So I'm not sure if them waiting for public outcry to do something about it is actually a viable reason of why they're not doing anything.
Right, yeah.
I think
that's certainly not why they're not doing it now, but it would be a reason why they would do it in the future, right? Like sure. they're not going Absolutely. To be able to ignore public outcry, but they're certainly not just sitting around waiting for it.
Right. No, that's a good point. I mean, that's the reason we're having this conversation. If the public outcry was deafening, then action would have to be taken. And we're looking at two of the most profitable industries on the planet, the drug trade and human trafficking. Mm. And so there's a lot of money being made in the abuses of humanity, whether it's drugs or trafficking. So that's a problem. And there's not a lot of money to be made in stopping it. There is a lot of money to be made in climate change initiatives. There
Right.
is a lot of money to be made in pandemic initiatives in big pharma. And
so is that a
healthcare.
strategy then? I mean, if it's a strategy to know what motivates power and manipulate conditions in order to motivate power to a just end, is it immoral or amoral to try to find ways to financially incentivize taking care of these kids, right? Like a lot of people would say, why should I have to do that? I mean, life's not fair, man. Why should I have to fucking wake up at 4:00 in the morning to catch my flight on Friday? Sucks.
Yeah.
That's how life is. So
you just illuminated a great benefit to this. Like, one of the huge problems in rescuing all of these kids is there is no major kind of pipeline for helping them heal and work with their trauma, basically. Military doesn't have it either, and these are people that served freedom around the world.
So
if heroes on the earth are not being served,
right,
and they put their lives on the line for humanity, and veterans are not being serviced, to the limits of what's possible, then we take a bunch of children that are just innocent, and we're going to basically demand that we set up infrastructure to facilitate the healing and repair of emotion and all of these things with kids. But you do bring a great point that if the healthcare system, with taxes and everything else, because if we look at just the first 6 months of this year, when the administration and the White House helped facilitate $6 trillion in COVID relief, just to relieve people that have been impacted by it. Think of all the programs around the world, that we could influence and affect positively, even famine.
If there was some kind of
$6 trillion.
There was some kind of asset forfeiture program for cartels, for example, that directly funded recovery for victims of trafficking, that might be an industry that could be created that would be beneficial. Now, we know that a lot of these industries are also predatory, right?
Yeah.
Some of the things we've talked about on the show here before, places like Southwest Key programs that have basically run for-profit prisons for underage illegal immigrants for decades now, and have made billions of dollars doing it. Rife with abuse, right?
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean,
you also don't want to create I think it's a good idea to create some kind of system to help these people heal, obviously. And if there's some financial benefit,
it has to be people, an imperative for sure.
For sure. But there's got to be this is why I think a lot of people don't do things. It's why you keep your eyes straight ahead when you see something bad happen or when you see trash on the ground, because if you point it out, then you're responsible for dealing with it.
Sure.
If we create an organization or a system or an infrastructure for these kids to pass through, then we are all responsible for keeping our eyes on that and making sure no fucked up shit happens to these kids.
Yeah.
Like more so than it already has. And I think that's a lot from people. I think people are paralyzed by that fact. Like, what are we going to do if we all admit that this is wrong?
Right.
You know what I mean? I think it is crippling. I think that is what the bystander effect is. Right.
Well, I think the parallel with climate change is looked at as this, every human on the earth is impacting climate change.
Right.
And so I think it's taken decades upon decades for them to finally line up the bowling pins, so to speak, to knock them down and monetize that whole process. Right. And this whole model of crimes against humanity, crimes against children has not had the global focus of decades for problem solving. And just what you're bringing to this conversation, I hadn't even thought about. I mean, you're talking about how do we monetize solutions platforms that serve all of the victims in this. I mean, that's innovation. I mean, and that's not my mission. My objective is to facilitate, or to encourage or to be a catalyst for these conversations. I'm not going to be a part of those things. But if there's people listening to this and they go, wow, that's a solution I could get behind. I can actually create a job. I can help people. I can facilitate the development of an industry, you know, and that's where innovation comes from. So, you know, good on you for that.
Well, I mean, we live in a 3-dimensional world. People like to imagine the world the way the world should be, and that is a complete waste of fucking time. The world is what it is.
Yeah.
You know, physics is what it is. The laws of the universe are what they are, and you can choose to operate within that environment or ignore that it exists, right? And
right. Yeah.
ignoring that it exists might keep you satisfied or happy for some amount of time, but it's not going to solve anything, and deep down you know you're full of shit, right?
Yeah.
So it seems like this particular the point of all that is if we can create a multi-point solution that doesn't become a burden on the state, that is typically a better solution than not. So welfare is a burden on the state. Mm-hmm. Generational welfare more so.
And if it's a burden on the state, it's a burden on the population.
Correct. When I say the state, I mean the middle class, because the middle class pays the bulk of taxes, right? It's stifling to an economy. It also makes people feel good to be involved in a solution like that.
Sure.
It's almost like the IKEA effect, where people don't want a 100% solution to things. They want an 80% solution, and they want to be involved in the last 20%. And look, you're talking about being able to make something, you're empowering people to create a bespoke solution. Not every circumstance is the same. Not every state is the same. Not every culture is the same. But we can all agree that taking advantage of children is unacceptable in any form.
Yeah.
And we have to figure out ways to leverage our collective power, government, and our economy against this shit, because all those things have to be working against it to make it go away.
Yeah, and enable the buy-in of every individual, to your point, not just serve up here's a 100% solution. If it's 80%, we need everyone to contribute that final 20% and bespoke it into their own solutions matrix. The other thing about the whole welfare program and the fact that if you look at today, where all of these people that are remaining unemployed because they're making a better living on unemployment than they are working in a legitimate job, why aren't they not realizing that society is still paying that bill? I mean, they are going to be paying that bill. Their taxes are going to be going
the
up.
Government doesn't make money. The government doesn't. There's no factory where the government. This isn't a communist state yet. The government doesn't have factories where they're producing some product or service and then delivering it to somebody outside of the country into an external economy to get more money into our economy. That is not how that works. It's our money.
Yeah, the government's revenue stream is its population.
Yeah. I mean, what a ridiculous thing to say, that the government has money.
Right.
Like it's taxes.
Yeah.
It's your money.
And the more they spend, the more we lose out of pocket.
And we had a journalist on Drink It Bros recently talking about the health insurance scam. It was what it really is, where the bulk of health insurance payments are unnecessary. At least 30% are completely unnecessary. Like, don't need to exist at all. And then there are the fees and administrative stuff associated with the agency itself that add another 20 to 30%. So we're talking about a majority of healthcare expenses in the United States are fucking pointless, right?
Yeah.
So this idea that we can't afford to do certain things, we can't afford to educate our children that way. We just can't afford it. We can't afford to fucking give our people healthcare. Yeah, we can. If you let these motherfuckers rob us blind all the time, we sure can.
Right.
But it is the system that exists, and you have to leverage that in whatever way you can.
And there's a reason education has had lost more money over the last, 2 or 3 decades. Budget cuts, arts, sports, music, anything. It's the dumbing down of this nation, unfortunately, because a less intelligent, less informed, less educated population is easier to control.
For sure. I mean, look, there was the first half of human history, there was a concerted effort by the aristocracy to keep the agrarians fucking stupid, right? They didn't want them learning how to read. And even in some modern cultures, like Islam, for example, not everywhere, but in a lot of these places, Afghanistan's making a full comeback here right now. They're like a woman learning how to read and do math and shit, no go. Right. Like if they understand that they're just another person, then they're going to start asking for rights and shit, and we can't allow that, obviously.
Yeah, which also falls into another form of crimes against humanity.
Right.
Repression. So, control. You know, and if we go back to that part of the conversation about what solutions are currently existing, I don't know the total number on teams that are basically doing rescues. You know, there's U.S. Marshals, there's CTIP in the DoD. There's FBI has different arms of this. There's a lot of government and DoD components where it's not necessarily a highly dedicated, prioritized mission.
Right. Why?
It's not equivalent to a CT mission or a HR mission as far as hostage rescue or CT.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think that the U.S. government, considering its global reach and technological advances and so on and so forth, why doesn't the U.S. government have a direct action special missions unit dedicated to this shit? Especially after two of the biggest offenders in recent memory globally have been apprehended and been under government control, right? I mean, we have seen a lot of, since, not really during Epstein's incarceration, but once Ghislaine Maxwell was arrested, sex trafficking rings all over the world started going down, one after another. 30 people here, 100 people here, so on and so forth.
Yep.
Now, these are lower level people. This is like arresting drug dealers on the street. Like, you'll stop that, but you're not going to stop it.
Right.
So why do you think that hasn't happened yet? Why do you think the government hasn't stood up?
I mean, I would love to ask that question to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
Yeah.
Or even the POTUS
or any of the POTUSes, right?
Yeah, I mean, Trump did, he, to his credit, he applied more resources and funding to stopping trafficking worldwide than I think the last century of presidents combined. And that's a pretty huge commitment. You know, it was a primary objective. I don't think it was covered at all in the mainstream media because, you know, it was Trump derangement syndrome. You can't give the guy any credit publicly.
Right.
But, and at one point last year, I was tracking the attorney generals of a good 10 or maybe 20 states, and each one of them had dedicated sometime in the spring of 2020 approximately $60 million to trafficking initiatives, anti-trafficking initiatives. At the end of the day, it totaled about $1 billion, and collectively from those individual states. So when this got put on my radar last year, and I started putting in my 1,000+ hours of research and conversations. Back to your question, I was in D.C. last week and talking to a 30-year veteran of the agency, former directorate. And when I proposed that idea of having a coalition, kind of a joint task force coalition of nations that get on the same page about attacking this, and maybe you target the most egregious countries that are known for trafficking. He agreed. He was 100% in agreement that is something that's been overlooked. He didn't have an answer why. And often it could be nefarious, of course, to your point. You've mentioned a few times. It could be people protecting people. It could just be industries that are highly profitable, again, being protected.
I think a lot is also, I honestly believe a lot of people who aren't involved can't imagine that this could possibly be true. This is the worst thing that you can really imagine, right?
Yeah,
a coordinated effort worldwide to either support or shield or ignore the trafficking of children, right? Like how could that be possible? right? How could we have let that happen? I think it's embarrassing for people.
Yeah. I mean, you're totally right. I mean, as a species, it's unacceptable that we've allowed this to occur. And again, whatever you think the numbers are, because you won't hear me referencing a ton of data on numbers, statistics, because then people debate the statistics. So I try to avoid kind of referencing statistical information, because then someone goes, well, that's wrong, or you're using the wrong source, or they're not credible. So thematically, any number is unacceptable, and the atrocities are incredible. I mean, and you know, I mentioned earlier, I get news reports from around the world daily from a global network of friends and colleagues, and there are busts and raids happening daily. So the units and the kind of special missions civilians groups, even, you know, that are attacking this, there's a lot of them out there, but it's whack-a-mole. It's an incredibly untenable fight, because, and even the statistics do say that somewhere upwards of 90% of those rescued find themselves back in the trafficking pipeline because they're broken.
Right.
And, you know, whether that's 3 months later, 3 days later, or 3 years later, they get put into the system. Maybe they're put into foster care. I mean, more data, even though I said I'd avoid it, but I'll give you verifiable stories that people can go and look at. In the UK last year, it was revealed and discovered that somewhere upwards of 30,000 kids over the previous decade had been rescued and put into the foster system and then reassimilated back into the trafficking network. And, and this was something that the UK government apologized for. They acknowledged, because as you said, predators find their ways into the systems and organizations and industry touch points to be those gatekeepers, to figure out how those systems work, and then to figure out how to create workarounds, or just to basically undermine them. Yeah. And so, you know, even in the religious sector, I mean, the Catholic Church, the Vatican, you know, this has been brought publicly out. I mean, the movie Spotlight.
Spotlight, yeah.
You know,
I mean, was it the Boston Herald? Is that the paper?
I believe so, yeah.
Does that sound right, producers? The Boston Globe, maybe. I don't know which paper it was, but Liev Schreiber worked there, so that's pretty cool. No, not really. He's an actor. But, yeah, and it's not surprising to hear, just a couple of points you made, it's not surprising to hear that there is, I don't know if you would consider that recidivism, but I guess technically that's what it is, because, I mean, think about the trope of the institutionalized prisoner that is now free and commits low-level crimes to get themselves thrown back in prison. That is far more common than you might think. I know it seems preposterous to you, but it's because people are creatures of habit. They get to know something, and everything else seems dangerous.
Well, and I feel like this is a form of brainwashing and programming, because people that have been abused tend to, at some point, become protectors of their abusers. And then part of that programming is you're not worth anything to anyone else. So at some point, it crosses over where they could be in the most angelic hands, and the deepest voices inside of those individuals are just picking away at them to escape and get back to their abusers. I mean, that's the horror of this, and the trauma of this is that if this was looked at as a terrorism style event on the GWAT scale, the abuse of children and the abuse of humans and the atrocities that are being imposed upon them through trafficking, exploitation, whatever it is, we've talked about when they go into any kind of a normal environment, they're not normal anymore. They're broken. And so, you know, and what happens is they tend to want to push all the boundaries of comfort and safety in those environments through creating trauma in those environments, which, again, replicates, it becomes this repeating cycle, so that if you adopt a kid who's been traumatized, or you're fostering a kid and you're a great person. You know, you're trying to get them therapy, you're taking them to church, you're involving them in sports, you're giving them all the things they always dreamed about. All that kid focuses on is, this person doesn't care about me. This person, they're going to leave me at some point.
Right.
So I'm going to break them before they trick me. And this is programming, you know, and their captors who are sick are programming these individuals. You know, that's part of, you know, I know one of your podcasts, you have a SEER instructor, you know, and so, and you've been through it, I'm sure yourself, you know, part of it is breaking down your psyche, you know, and every one of these individuals, humans, kids, children, are being broken every day by the experiences being imparted, whether they're being raped 30 times a day,
right,
which some of these individuals in interviews are talking about, or they're just being abused physically or you know, beaten or starved.
I mean, Dave Chappelle
whatever.
tells a story about this. It's an anecdote in one of his, I think it was in one of the first 2 shows he did for Netflix when he came back, The Bird Revelation and Equanimity. I think it was one of the 2. I can't remember which one it was, but he tells the story of a pimp. And it was I think it was on an HBO series the guy was talking about. It was like, how do you get these women to be so loyal to you? And he says, the first thing I do is whip the shit out of them. With like I think he said he took like an extension cable, and just whip the shit out of them.
Break them first.
And then he would let them sit there in pain for a while. Then he would come back to them and bring them pills and tell them that everything is going to be okay. So they associate him with the savior from their problems that he created.
Mind control.
I mean, that's a pretty basic form of interrogation. Even you let somebody go without food or sleep for a while, and then you give them the food or the sleep or whatever it is. You give them. It's a good cop, bad cop, right?
Yeah.
Except for you're playing both roles in this scenario.
Well,
So
and they're choosing individuals that are already in some kind of a vulnerable state. So they're not finding alphas, they're finding betas, unfortunately. And
Iceberg Slim, that's his name. Look that shit up. It's insane. The pimp. Yeah, and it's to what you're saying, this is now happening to all of society though, but I won't say it's to a lesser degree, it's just less intense, but over a greater period of time.
I agree.
Like if something fucked up exists long enough, people just be like, man, that's fucked up, and move on. They just accept that it's fucked up. They'll comment on it, but they won't do anything about it because that is the norm. That is to be expected. So,
right. We're living that. Society is exposing this as becoming a new normal.
Right, right now, for example, this is a good example of this shit. After the late 90s and early 2000s, the Vatican took all that fucking heat for the priests all throughout the United States. Although the investigations primarily focused, I believe, on that school for the deaf and blind in Wisconsin, and then the priests in the Boston metro area. But it was happening everywhere. The guy who was the cardinal who was in charge of hiding that and relocating those people and negotiating settlements and making sure that nothing blew back on the church for years was Benedict, the guy that the College of Cardinals elected to be Pope. So if you're out there and you're wondering if the quote-unquote church at large supports that behavior, I think electing a guy Pope, right? I mean, you could naturally presume that if the United States were to elect with a unanimous vote, right, whomever it happened to be, they would be endorsing that person's resume and their behavior. Right. That is a reasonable thing to expect.
As a representative.
Correct.
Of the whole, yeah.
Now, he didn't last very long. Maybe because a lot of that stuff came out. Maybe because he wouldn't play ball with them. I mean, I never really bought into the whole Hitler Youth thing that people tried to lay on him like he's a child in Germany. What the fuck would you have done? Like, people like to think about or talk about what they would have done in those situations. Like, shut the fuck up, dude.
Yeah. Well, that's one of Soros' creation stories. Also.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Sidebar.
Just that bit is nonsense. But the stuff he did after the fact when he was actually in power. That's what troubles me. Mm-hmm. But still, people, there's no clamoring. There's there's nobody, and there isn't a huge groundswell of support in the United States to expel the Catholic Church or even hold them accountable.
No. Well, there's a mythology that America is the new Rome.
Well, that's definitely true.
And, with that being said, the Vatican was an imperative control feature to the Roman Empire. So maybe that all adds up today. One of the interesting things, as you mentioned, the Vatican, some of my advisors, I guess, information providers in the European nobility, there is no enforcement. There is no control group that resides over the Vatican. Even today, as we're watching news stories come out about the Vatican courts are trying behaviors and fraud and so on and so forth. It's all it's all internal, which to me is all for show. It's showing the world, hey, we're policing this.
Well, that's what happens anytime a college football team gets caught doing some weird recruiting shit.
Yeah, we'll look into it ourselves.
Yeah, we're going to conduct an internal investigation, and then they levy a fine and suspension internally, just hoping that they don't lose that bowl game at the end of the year where they actually make a lot of money. Yeah. I mean, that's essentially what it is.
For sure. As long as you provide actionable means that we are addressing this, it's not going by the wayside.
Right.
People, to your point about complacency, people go, okay, they're handling it. Because people don't want to get involved. But, I'm sure you're familiar with the whole concept of nation states, and it's become more and more the thing of conspiracy theory, but really it's conspiracy fact. And, these nation states like the City of London and the Vatican and DC, even Malta as well, even the Bank of International Settlements is a nation state as well. And so they fall outside of accountability within the countries that they reside, and in many cases, they're above the law. And the advice.
Well, we saw that with Prince Andrew, right?
For sure.
Like he was not going to be held accountable for any of his shit because of what is essentially diplomatic immunity, right?
Right. And these are things that as Americans we're not raised being educated on how the ways of the world actually work.
Right.
How law of the land or law of the sea, has an impact in how things are enforced. We look at common law. Common law is the law of our nation, essentially, which resides from canon law. So these things get incredibly complicated and complex, and I'm only learning the surfaces of them, but I'm learning that they influence this whole ball of wax and the whole global network, and how all of these things are interconnected. And these noble players that I've in conversation with, they look at the only way to go and impose some type of enforcement on a nation state is by the accruing of crimes against humanity, or crimes, that basically you would need a coalition of forces essentially to basically all agree that these are reprehensible acts, and they are not policing within their borders.
Well, I mean, how are you going to get European aristocracy, the United States, and Imperial China to agree on something?
You got it.
You know what I mean? Like people talk about
incredibly complex.
If like aliens were to show up, the world would unite and all this stuff. Like, no, they wouldn't. It would be like the last season of Game of Thrones, where Cersei withholds her troops from the fight, waiting to see who wins so she can fight the fucking loser or fight the winner.
Right.
It's people will try
and fight the winner when they're in a weakened state because they just fought for their lives.
I don't give a shit how fucking scared you think people might be by stuff like that. I promise you, when the time comes, China is going to protect its own interest. The U.S. probably won't, because we think we are morally superior to people, so we probably wouldn't. And
Team America.
Yeah, we'll suffer because of it, but it is what it is. I would rather. I think if a country doesn't have the fucking moral compass or balls or whatever it takes, the willingness to sacrifice to stop shit like this, and the country shouldn't exist in the first place. It certainly doesn't have the right to exist. Society doesn't have the right to exist if it doesn't protect children first and foremost, in my opinion.
Wouldn't that be a new world order twist?
Yeah.
You don't get to have a nation. You're going to be absorbed into a parent nation if you're not going to protect your children within some reasonable means.
I feel like that would be a reasonable expectation of any organization, whether it be a country or otherwise. So,
and we're not doing it ourselves right now. I mean,
we had to pass, what was it, Megan's Law for the National Sex Offender Registry. I think that one, I think that's what created that, or one of the, I don't remember which, and then there was one in Florida where the routine sentence, and this is the way lower level stuff, but the sentence for, the average sentence for somebody that raped a child was about 18 months. That's how much they ended up serving, is about 18 months. Like, how could that be possible in a civilized society? People think that we're more civilized now because we've got iPads and fucking phones and the internet and fucking electric cars. I think a community that was living in huts that punished people for raping children would probably be far more civilized than we are right now.
Yeah, it'd be the death penalty in a tribe where someone was harming a child, which is another, topic that we can talk about. I mean, that you're 18 months for raping a child. I mean, that is actually the perfect example of how people on the wrong side of this have lobbied and spent money to push agendas and to push law changing into normalizing this as acceptable. Whereas if it was on the other end of the spectrum, if it was a death penalty for raping a child or being a pedophile or anything else that's going to do lifelong harm to a minor, anybody that gets raped, adult or minor, I don't think you ever shake that off. I mean, I don't think you ever come to true terms with it.
Right.
So if someone's going to bring that kind of force upon another, then great. Let God sort them out. Death penalty. Because, three things. I avoid the word hate. I'm not a guy that uses the word hate. But the only three examples in my life that I've used the word hate are I hate pedophiles, I hate rapists, and I hate serial killers. And why is because they're all premeditated.
Right.
They're not crimes of passion. They're premeditated crimes, which means that person, something's broken in that person. And so they are constructing a plan to enact these things intentionally on another human. And that's fucking unacceptable.
Yeah. So Arizona just passed a bill that if someone's convicted of producing or distributing child pornography under the age of 12, they would serve they will serve a life sentence without the possibility of parole. If they're convicted of sex trafficking, same punishment. And then if you're convicted of certain types of statutory rape that are beyond, like the Romeo and Juliet laws, same thing.
Sure.
But still, we're playing whack-a-mole here.
Yeah.
We're piecemealing things. We're not dealing with the institution globally that allows for this to happen. Not only for it to happen, but for it to happen with relative impunity. Right?
And we're seeing the states that are standing apart from accepting it and not accepting it, which they're the states I want to be in.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a division that I welcome. I mean, I actually welcome seeing all the people wearing masks because I know that they're not people that I'm going to align with.
Yeah, it's like people who, it's like being a single guy and you find out the girl is into astrology or listens to Call Her Daddy. You can be like, all right, I don't need to get involved unless you just want to have fun. If you're trying to find a wife, don't look in a bar, is all I'm saying.
Right.
But yeah, it's the same thing. It identifies assholes. That's why I don't like the idea of, I think actually McConaughey talked about this shit in the first season of True Detective. Like, I don't want racists to be able to hide. Mm-hmm. I don't want fucking sociopaths and pedophiles and assholes like that to be able to hide. Like, right. Don't ban the things they say. Don't ban their symbols. Don't do any of that. Let them fucking exist out in the open because then I can see that motherfucker.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, why are we institutionally creating a scenario where these motherfuckers are able to hide in plain sight. That doesn't make any fucking sense.
Right. Well, so, in some ways they're not right now in the social media world because, these social platforms, the biggest platforms that exist, are protecting those messages, those means that they have. I'm aware of lawsuits that are happening right now against some of these organizations that I won't name, but and the things that are going on behind the scenes are, if the public knew this stuff, then again, the public knows a lot that it's not reacting to. It's laissez-faire about a lot of things. But the problem is the shareholders of these companies do know about these lawsuits, and the shareholders are showing signs of reaction to what's going on and how these lawsuits might end up going. And so, ambiguously all said, there's a lot of battlefields that are basically being fought on right now. And unfortunately right now, because of our national administration, whichever groups those are, whichever agencies those are, there is a severe lacking of enforcement of things happening, whether it's the SEC, whether it's the intelligence agencies that are basically tracking these things. Whatever happened to all the tapes and all the information that were acquired on Epstein's Island? The Wiener laptop. Where is that? And how much time has to go by before that's revealed? The Hunter laptop. The stuff I've seen with Hunter's face on it. That is 100% Hunter. Is mind blowing. Disgusting. The things with his own bloodline, that he's doing, that's completely unacceptable. Sexual deviance, basically pedophilia. So, but yet he's protected. And so when people call me because they know my network, whether it's at the Pentagon or whether it's, wherever it is, they're like, who do I send this information to? I mean, why? These people should be arrested. I'm like, there's no enforcement right now.
Yeah, right? I mean, who would arrest them?
Exactly. Things are stalled.
I mean,
right
maybe
now.
Interpol, but Interpol doesn't have the right to arrest any world leader, whether it be a member of a royal family or whatever, right?
Yeah, Interpol needs the cooperation of the nation that they would be operating within. And
which,
so,
like if you're trying to arrest the Venezuelan president, you're not going to get that unless it's a coup attempt, right?
Right.
But then Interpol has... part of the international agreements are that they wouldn't get involved in the state's politics either, right? So that would be breaking that rule. So there's no world police. Exactly. Not that there should be, but there's not.
Well, but I've always said there shouldn't be. But then when these scenarios come up, there should be. But then how do you know that they're on that moral, ethical high ground?
I mean, it used to be back in the day that. It would be the community. The community would have had enough, and the mob would just murder the people in charge. Now, obviously, that's not a good solution.
Right.
We can't allow that. It's especially not as things become more complex. More information has not made people smarter, obviously, because they felt like having more information was a substitution for actually understanding the goddamn information.
Yeah.
That was obviously not true. I don't know why anybody ever thought it would be. Right? Like if you, it's like being in a debate with somebody and they start rattling off a bunch of facts about it, but like you haven't actually made a fucking point yet.
Right.
Give me a linear point. Here is a thought. Here's evidence for that thought. Here's a conclusion on why all that fits together in a linear way. That is an argument.
Yeah.
But we don't make arguments anymore. We just spit random, disassociated facts at one another.
Alleged facts, right.
In some cases, that is true. So
yeah. Well, and I mean, as you're talking about it, I mean, when there's no enforcement happening, what's the next progression is vigilantism.
Right.
And, in the circles that we run in.
And that's a problem, right? Because.
Well, it's a problem, but I mean, the circles that we run in with some of the highest performing humans on the earth, that are assaulters and that are combat veterans, whether they're in the black side or the white side, or beyond those levels. Those guys have been exercising very measured attitudes. And I mean, and given my history in that world and my propensity for accepting unconventional information, I've been watching all of this unfold since the very beginning.
Right.
And I watched all of those guys, whether it's your friends at Black Rifle or it's the Mike Glovers at, American Contingency or John Lovell at Warrior Poet or go
Sawman or Ballard or any of those guys.
Yeah,
There's a lot of people doing stuff.
Yeah, go down the list. They were all very measured in how they were reacting to the first 3 to 6 months of this. Hey, everybody, calm down. It's not that bad. It's not what you think it is. This shit's going to blow over, kind of thing. But then as it carried on and up leveled, everybody kind of got like, whoa, this isn't, I'm not really on board with this,
right.
And then they're finding themselves having to coach the population because the population's losing their minds. To the point where, in the last 3 to 6 months, the mindset has been, and I think I've heard you quote this, but the last thing that this population wants is highly trained individuals. I think Tim Kennedy quoted in a recent Ballistic magazine of the last thing the society wants is the most highly trained individuals in warfare enacting war on its own ground.
Right.
And you guys joke about, I don't need to be prepared because all I need to do is know who the most prepared person in the neighborhood is,
right.
and I get their stuff, and these are truths. But but the people that are not in the combat reality, they're not former prior service individuals. They don't understand that reality, and they like to go, hey, let's go to war on this. It's like, no, let's not go to war on this, but let's manage this and let's wake up. Let's not get woke.
Right. Yeah.
Let's awaken to what's really going on here, and Tim does a great job when he was here yesterday talking to you guys. He does maybe the best job of saying, I'm not going to cancel anyone. I'm going to have a conversation, an intelligent conversation with anyone who is willing to sit down with me. Even if I 100% disagree with every view that they have, I'm going to have the conversation, because not having the conversation means it's already done.
Right.
But
I mean, if you refuse to have the conversation, I'm not saying you should engage with every troll knucklehead out there, but if you refuse to have the conversation, you are considering that settled science, insofar as no more progress will be made on that issue because you've disengaged from the conversation.
By either side.
Yeah, so you're just going to have a division forever on that. And I don't think we can afford to, especially when it comes to something like this.
No.
People need to be made aware of what's happening. People need to be trained on how the world really works, where power really lands.
Right.
And how they can flex their individual power, whatever it happens to be, either as an individual or leverage that as part of a group as well, right?
100%.
People need to be taught how to do all that stuff. And we think that that's some kind of agenda or something. No, it's called fucking leadership.
Right.
It's what leaders do. They take information and combine it with their experience and distill it into lessons for people that haven't lived those things yet so they can live them a little bit better.
Right.
That's the entire point of leadership.
Yeah, elevate everyone underneath them.
Right.
That is the mission for a good leader. And if, again, in America, we have no clue about nobility, what royalty is. These noble bloodlines and royal bloodlines have existed thousands of years in some cases.
Right.
And
well, we just don't have. We're like a dog sitting at home, and the master leaves, and 5 minutes go by, and it feels like forever, or 10 hours go by, and it feels the same as 5 minutes did. We don't know, because America is it's such a microwave culture, and it as a country is so young, and what we understand about governance and the formation and struggles of a country and the power that grows inside of that is so young. We have no concept of 17, 18-year-old or 1800-year-old bloodlines still being in power today, thanks to all sorts of different events, whether it just be the system in general or things like during the Victorian era where she intentionally seeded all of Europe with her fucking bloodline. All this shit is way older than what you think.
Way older.
So
and who do you think established all of the governments on the earth?
Constantine in the fucking 4th century.
The most powerful people.
Yeah.
And do you think they established all of these governments to have real autonomous power? No.
Right.
They all knew. I mean, anyone, if I found a company and I put you in charge of it, you still know that you're going to take direction from me. Even if I'm just in the shadows, an angel investor, whatever, as long as I have some kind of control over how you run that company, even if no one in the world knows it, and that's the agreement, you know it. And you know I can take that company away from you because I'm more powerful than you, because I established the company. And so every organization on the planet, and this is what people have a hard time getting their heads around, was established by someone. And that someone was placed in power, and if they passed on, they sure as hell passed on that power to someone that they trusted to overwatch that.
Right.
And that has never ended. And so I don't care if it's Apple or Amazon, you know, if you're the founder, the number one mission is you never relinquish the decision-making control. And yet, if you're the founder, you're wrestling for control or ownership with your VCs. You know, everyone's playing a game to take the power of that.
And it's a lot of it is 3-dimensional, right? I don't have to. This is what I talk about with seemingly innocuous laws being passed. I don't have to call something illegal, right? I can make the conditions under which that thing exists illegal, or I can say that all things like that are illegal, right? And only enforce it when I don't agree with it, right? That's what Russia does. I mean, this is something that happens in acquisitions all the time. Like, we don't need to take 51% of his company right now because we can buy 30% now, and then once it goes through a second round of funding, we can gobble up more, and then with one of our buddies, and then now we control a company, right? That shit happens all the time.
Yeah, well, you look at that thing circulating right now on BlackRock and Vanguard, and that person walks through the list of shareholders, the list of company investors, so on and so forth, and it's right there in black and white. And if you haven't found that as a listener or a watcher on this show, then they're on their way to have a 20 trillion valuation, essentially, of residential control. They own all of the media companies, they own social media, they own technology companies. And there is a list of who are the BlackRock kind of power players, but there is not a list on the Vanguard list. You know, it is not a publicly held company. You know,
right?
It's a private company, and so that is just a glimpse. And this is where more and more glimpses into the true power structures of the world are being revealed. You know, more people are allowing access behind the curtain because it is a cyber war. I mean, the war is on the internet. The digital soldiers, you know, are people that can augur their way into these financial modeling centers or banking systems or whatever. And so, which is also why the media is on overdrive for narrative control. You know, keep the focus here. You know, people are distracted. Keep them distracted. Keep this fear narrative going. You know, let's let people get a stipend so they don't have to go to work, and we'll shut down small businesses, which fuels more corporations.
Yeah, it's corporatism, exactly. And that's how it happens. I mean, this BlackRock shit just kind of hit the news relatively recently, sometime this year, but this has been going on for a long time. They are the world's largest asset manager, the largest financial institution in the world
that we know of.
I mean, that's an actual finance institution and not just some behind the scenes thing. They are the epitome of the revolving door between Wall Street and the White House, right? Maybe more so than anybody before. Trump took a lot of heat for bringing business people into his administration, for putting generals in positions that weren't necessarily filled by generals before. And the thinking was, this guy's a fucking, he wants to be anti-people, big business, and then control the military, which makes him seem like the narrative was supposed to be like, oh, he's a fucking dictator or whatever. Here are 3 former BlackRock employees. And keep in mind, if you haven't read about these people recently, they are spending billions of dollars buying up properties all over the place. When Ross talks about people walking into neighborhoods and putting cash offers in face-to-face to a person with no commission necessary, right? So they get 100% of the money for, I don't know, double what their house is worth. It's BlackRock doing that all over the country right now. They're buying up farmland. They're buying up real estate all over the fucking place. So we've known about this for a while. These people have been doing this for a while. Biden nominated Brian Deese, D-E-E-S-E, to serve as the director of the National Economic Council, former BlackRock employee. Previously served as the deputy director of both the Office of Management and Budget and the NEC under Barack Obama. After his stint with the Obama administration, he joined BlackRock. So he was government, then went to BlackRock as global head of sustainable investing. And now he's back in the government again. Jeff Hauser, who is ironically director of the Revolving Door Project. It's hilarious. A group that monitors corporate influence in government. It's hilarious that this even has to exist. He told Reuters in November of 2020 that BlackRock's stake in policy decisions could compel Deese to, quote, be absent from big chunks of his job. So not surprising there. Biden also nominated Adewale Adeyemo, I don't know how you say his name, Adeyemo, to serve as Deputy Secretary of the Treasury. He also worked in the Obama administration in the economics, or in the Treasury Department, and then as Deputy National Security Advisor for International Economics. Later joined BlackRock as a senior advisor. And Kamala Harris's chief economic advisor, Michael Pyle, also BlackRock, right? And the
infiltration.
The current Secretary of Defense, General Lloyd Austin, owns plenty of military industrial complex stocks. So he went from government to private sector back to government. This should be, I've said this for a long time. We're getting a little off topic here, but I think it plays into the government power stuff. There should be
the global economy. This is all about money.
Yeah, there should be a moratorium, a 20-year moratorium. If you serve for the government, you can't fucking work for a company that supplies it with anything, whether it's consultation or like Halliburton with resources or whatever the fuck else. Sure. And if you work in private government like that, you can consult the U.S. government, but you cannot hold a position. Right. You can't do both. Yeah. There's a reason for the separation.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's really just become a money laundering model, money circulation between nations, relief packages. I mean, even in wars, we'll destroy a city, destroy a nation, and then we'll go and rebuild it. Mm-hmm. And we'll rebuild it with our tax money, essentially.
There's a lot of money in the rebuild. It's essentially just...
but that tax money is, again, coming out of the population's pockets.
People have talked about redistribution of wealth for a long, long time. And usually it's the left and welfare. But the right and the military-industrial complex has spent more money than the left. Yeah, frankly, and it's a lot more.
Control longer, I think. As well.
I mean, just the war in Iraq, $6 trillion is probably more than we've spent on benefits in the last 20 years. I would assume, right? I mean, how much? Delco, look up how much we spend on welfare every year. Multiply it times 20.
Well, and this whole conversation we're having is so enormously complex.
Yep.
And if we agree that the most reprehensible crime on the planet is against children in every form, it all comes down to that is the height of the most egregious crime imaginable, and it's all about money. I mean, so everyone is about moving money, taking money, claiming money. The profit, you could say that everything is being driven by power and money. And if drugs and children or human trafficking are on the height of the list, again, the only way we're going to solve these things and the only way we're going to wake up the entire world about the crime that's going on, because this is a global organized crime syndicate.
Right.
You mentioned Game of Thrones. It is Game of Thrones. I mean, these family bloodlines and the people that serve their interests, which would trickle down to governments and nations, organizations like the UN, whatever it is, they're all about influencing the populations. They're all about redistributing the wealth, to your point. can we even imagine what a bloodline that's existed for 1,000 years, what kind of wealth they've accumulated?
Right.
Because if we name off Alexander the Great, or we name off, the Caesar kind of element, at whatever point, King Solomon, they were the wealthiest human on the earth.
Right.
Claimed. Somebody is a bloodline, recipient of that most wealth on the planet.
Right.
Most power on the planet. So just because the Forbes list has the top 10 or the Saudi family, and I think a public claim on the Saudi family is around 1.2 trillion.
And there's about 250 members, give or take, that have any kind of influence.
Yeah, something like that. But the Saudi family has really only been recognized as being in power of Saudi Arabia for around 250 years.
Yeah.
Just like the Windsor family has only been around less than 300 years or so.
Give or take.
And so these are not 1,000-year-old bloodlines that are claimed to exist, but 2,000-year bloodlines. The Breakspears, the Orsinis, the Merovingians. You go down the list of the Medicis. These.
I mean, the Medicis controlled the Vatican for a while. Yeah. For quite a while, right?
They all share power over the Vatican, allegedly, And so these things are, again, these are concepts we cannot comprehend as Americans because we're not given those insights. Our leaders are not making sure that we understand how the world works, which is the point you made. We're not informed. I mean, sure, you can go read a history book, but it's hard to even find which history books have the complete story,
right?
Because so many of them are propagated.
You talked about the Forbes list. Mm-hmm. You're not going to see any of the Russian oligarchs on there, and you're not going to see the fact that Putin controls more than the 7 Russian oligarchs combined now. I mean, he's personally worth probably, I don't know, the number I've heard is like $7 trillion is what his assets would accumulate to.
Yeah, we can't fathom.
And who knows what the premier of China, like, what's he worth?
I mean, here's the most out there thing I'll say on this whole conversation is I've seen alleged ledger books, and I said this on the Veritas radio conversation I had. I've seen ledgers shown to me of upwards of $650 trillion in wealth held by a small group of noble bloodlines.
Right.
And so if I go and Google, what all of the value and wealth of the world is, it's around 399 trillion. So if everything publicly on the earth equates to 399 trillion, and yet there is a less than half a dozen of some of the most powerful bloodlines that use means to track their own wealth because everyone knows what they have.
Right.
It doesn't matter how much of it you have. But that also leads to the realization that if you have wealth that is, quite frankly, beyond comprehension, and you are evil, then it's all about what can you do that no one else can do, you know? And I mean, if we just take a very pedestrian example of blowfish, and because it's laughable, you buy a $10,000 plate of blowfish in Japan, it's not prepared by the
right way, and you die. Yeah.
You die, and sure, they're going to give you an injection and of epinephrine and bring you back, but it's the thrill that you're going to have and all of that. And so there's much speculation on the extreme example of this spectrum of abuses of children. If we get into bloodletting or sacrifice, and again, I don't care if it's 10 kids or 100 kids, the elite of the elite of the elite, that no amount of power or money matters anymore. So I'm going to abuse the most sacred things to the species, basically, which is a reprehensible act, and it's unfathomable. I mean, it's just.
But we've seen it through in cultures throughout history, particularly ones based around aristocracy, right? So Greeks and Romans.
Egyptians
and Egyptians as
or
early
Aztecs. You just keep going back, Mayans,
And it's human sacrifice, and it is the exploitation of children, right? Yeah. At every turn, and
for personal or to their gods or
whatever it happens to be. Yeah, I mean I think it was the Aztecs. Was it the Aztecs or the Mayans in Mexico City for the temple where they sacrificed 85,000 people in like 6 days? Or some shit. I mean, it was a long weekend, I guess. And they were opening a new temple there.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the enormity of that issue is pretty wild, and it's hard to comprehend for people. But it's something that's been, if it's happening in a microcosm of a single civilization, like Roman culture, early Greek culture, one of those. If it's happening there, why would the expectation not be that mindset evolved into something larger, right? Like some people were like, why just Greece? Why just Rome? Why not the entire globe? You know what I mean? I guess that would have had to have happened in the middle of the last millennia when people started believing the fucking world was round. But
right.
Why not more? Why not more? And then that creates a power vacuum that will be filled by someone. As soon as people start thinking about that power, people are going to try to get that power.
You're right.
That's just how it is. It's like a fucking infinity stone.
Well,
nobody's going to walk by that thing and leave it on the ground. You're going to pick it up and use it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
You know what you can possibly do with it if it's used in the right way. And you bring a great point up, is that the evolution of this mass abuse of children, and I mean, if you're a spiritual person or a religious person, you're breaking the souls of all of these kids. I mean, that is the thing. I mean, negative energy, we could get into like woo-woo stuff here, of frequencies and vibrations and all of these things. Like there's conversations about energy vampires, where you just around somebody who just sucks the life out of you. But if these things exist on a bigger scale, then the fear and terror and trauma that you're imposing on all of these people, it's pretty impactful. It's impactful to your species,
Right.
And then if you evolve to what you're saying, 85,000 people sacrificed to open a temple in that era. A modern example is looking at Pornhub, with the exploitation of children that's going on Pornhub, or MindGeek, and these platforms where the scale is kind of, it's not measurable. We really don't know. And then they're enabling people to upload their own videos, which again is encouraging contribution.
Right.
And then the other ridiculous element of this is, everything I'm talking about has been shown or shared to me. It's not speculative in me. These are verifiable, contextual conversations we can have. But the payment systems of these platforms feed to the Netherlands, which again, why are these funnel points going to single points? Why aren't they being investigated by agencies designed to protect our population?
Well, if you're looking for a leak in a hose, right, you might see a large leak down at the bottom, or you may see the evidence of a leak, which would be reduced water pressure or something. And you will follow that hose upward until you find every leak you can possibly find. You do it with a car tire using soap or something, so the bubble, or a bike tire rather, so the bubbles, you can see them. But that is how it works. Yeah. And the intent or the thinking behind that is something is happening and something is causing it. Maybe it's a million different little holes, maybe it's one big one, but you don't know until you start following that thing upward. And it is highly suspicious when most of the packet loss or water pressure loss or money is going to one place.
Yeah.
That is something that requires investigation at that point.
Well, and that is another great analogy you're making, because if it is a hose and there's little pinholes all over that bring attention and people go and investigate and they find, we rescued 100 kids here.
Yeah,
we rescued 30,000 here in the UK, or whatever. 400,000 in Germany recently on a cyber sting. Incredible numbers. And then you could find a massive hole in that hose and think it can't be bigger than this.
Right.
But it's still a hole. It's not the end of the hose. And so it's that insatiable investigation that you're talking about and analytics that says, is this really the end of the hose? And where is the end of the hose? And that's so.
And is the hose itself the problem? Right.
For sure.
You know what I mean? That's the ultimate question that you're going to get to. And to be honest,
it's a great point.
If you think about it, I think about it in a combat triage kind of situation. If I see a dude bleeding out of his arm, for example, I'm going to try to find a wound. If I find multiple ones, I mean, you want to put a tourniquet 2 inches above a wound, right? If I can't find that, or if I see wound, I'm like, fuck this, I'm going all the way up, right? And I think that's where we are right now in this investigation.
Yeah, and in reality, there's an intercavitary, non-compressible.
Yeah. There's sometimes you can't.
Non-tourniquetable bleed, and the patient's dying inside, and we're not even aware because we're not exploring it deep enough. And this is why we're all over the place a little bit on this conversation, because what I've said with every influencer in a leadership role or an agency kind of responsibility component is it is a complete ecosystem, and kicking doors and grabbing kids is absolutely, thank God for every one of those humans that's doing that.
Right. But it satisfies
but it's the systemic part, that is the ecosystem. Yeah. To your point, we need to remove the hose, and then we need to plug the source.
Right. It's like getting angry.
Yeah.
Does it really help? Like that combat, that rescue satisfies a need we have to get either justice or vengeance, maybe both. They're certainly not the same thing, but it satisfies the need for people to feel like they've done something at great risk to themselves to stop something bad. I think that is a noble thing that we feel. It's not a dopamine hit, that is serotonin. People that have
and it's tangible
rescued children or done something like that, they probably feel that moment for the rest of their lives, and that's good, right? It's good that they do that.
Amen.
But it's not enough. And it's not a criticism of them. It is a criticism of all of us that we've not taken the steps to address this problem at the highest possible level as soon as fucking possible. I mean, this is, to me, worth fighting wars over. It's worth fucking assassinating people over. I'm not telling anybody to go out and fucking start murdering people. I'm saying the collective...
Make it a mainstream conversation.
I do think these people should die. I think the collective will of the people globally has to be aligned on this issue. And that is that the exploitation of children, particularly in a sexual way or something that damages them for life, has to be met with the most severe consequences. Agreed. It has to be completely untolerated on all four corners of the earth.
I agree.
And that's the next step here. So what do we do next? We're still collecting information and collecting. The purpose of doing that is because as an investigator, you don't want to ask a question you don't already know the answer to, right? Because you're not listening to the answer. You're looking at the person's mannerisms. How does this person change when faced with the truth? If I say, excuse me, if it's a rape victim, for example, rape and murder victim from a serial killer, if you describe the scene as it happened, because of the way these folks internalize that action, right, because of what it means to them, you will see the pupils dilate, you will see heart rate go up, stuff like that, because they're getting excited about the event because they know it's real. If you're describing it wrong, they'll fucking smirk and give you the bullshit, right? Mm-hmm. That's like one of the first things you learn
in interrogation.
Yeah. So collecting all this information is important. Asking people uncomfortable questions is important.
Well, so this last 3 weeks, I've been on the road 6,000 miles just in the United States, meeting with highly involved individuals and running scenarios by them. And we haven't even gotten into any crazy talk in this conversation. If anyone thinks that anything we've talked about is crazy or irrational or conspiracy, you have no idea whatsoever. And so in private, I've had very crazy conversations that no one probably here wants to hear yet. And I haven't gotten a no. I haven't gotten you're off target, and I haven't gotten that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. What I've gotten is I can't argue with you. What I've gotten is I have not been able to substantiate that. We could not create a thread to those people or to those things, but I don't doubt that they exist. And so, and to your point, so what's next for me? If I look at the UN and I look at the Vatican as the most influential kind of points of blessing for this recent pandemic about the enforcement of whatever it is, vaccines or face coverings or being locked in your domicile, they seem to be the two most influential points on leading humanity to a single outcome. And if that is, and everyone agrees that I've spoken with, whether they're DC related or elsewhere, you know, that's where I'm headed, you know, and I, you know, my network is working on connections into the Vatican. And again, if all goes well for me, no one's ever going to know I ever existed. No one's ever going to know who I actually am. Just like no one knows any other project I've ever worked on. You know, that's not my mission here on earth. But it's to be a catalyst and try to solve problems that mean something to people. And so getting there, to your point, I mean, even when I met with various intelligence agency leadership that I've known for 10 or 15 years, and I didn't know where they stood on this because this is a completely new problem set for me. It was as informative to me in what they wouldn't tell me and what they wouldn't respond to your point about body language and everything else, as it was in the things that they did say. And even then, none of them actually waved me off and said, I'm wrong. So this conversation that you're enabling, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate, you know, Dakota kind of offering me this slot today, you know, is like, it's another opportunity to highlight and talk about hard topics and things that are, every one of the people here, just go look into these things, you know, and prepare for your own mind to be blown, because, and prepare to find a hell of a lot of censorship, because your first 10 scrolls on the Google, depending on how challenging the topic is, are going to be anti-narratives. They're going to be why this is crazy, why this is stupid, why this is debunked, why Snopes said this was stupid, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so
Snopes is owned by a Miami, weren't they started by a paper in Miami that was owned by a conglomerate of Soros? I mean, what the fuck are we even doing here?
Soros has invested in over 2,000 U.S. companies.
Yeah, you know, he made a mistake during the last couple of election cycles. He largely went under the radar and and appeared to most people, even on the right, as just some kind of fanciful conspiracy, right? But then we found out that he spent money on like 250 different judge races in the United States. Yeah. Why would he do that? Why would a fucking foreign billionaire be funding the campaigns of judges across the United States? Why?
States, all
I mean, get the fuck out of here, man.
And AGs, you know, as well.
Yeah, attorneys general, for sure. And they all had the same thing in common, which was proclivity to, I guess, from their perspective, hold police accountable. Right? From most reasonable people's perspective, to weaken the institution of policing in the United States, right? That's clearly what's happening there.
Clearly. And they knew what they were doing. There was an agenda that, you know, these agendas have been being operated upon for decades. It's not just since the United States started a lockdown in March of 2020, you know. So, you know, I was fortunate enough that I've been aware of a lot of unconventional information for most of my life, and I've learned 100x about things I've thought about, but I've learned 100 times more about all of it in the last year, and I'm grateful that I got led into diving deep on this when I did get locked down in California. You know, then it was an opportunity to spend 18 hours a day basically researching this stuff, because I had nowhere to go and nothing else to do. So that was one huge blessing that the NWO didn't consider, is that it fueled.
You're talking about Hulk Hogan and those guys, not the wrestlers.
The WW?
No, they had the New World Order and World Wrestling. Was it WWE, I think? No, it was WCW. That's right. Now defunct, I believe.
Well, those guys are powerful, but
not in the same way, yeah.
But this one,
at lifting.
Yeah, when this thing went down, you know, I basically locked myself down and went deep, and thank God it was before censorship really got activated. So the unfiltered and uncensored amount of information that I was able to pull and absorb and circulate for kind of my voices of reason, which I still have today, and I consider you one of them now, is that the compilation of what this narrative started to really look like became kind of immeasurable.
Right.
And luckily I have a ton of bandwidth, you know, and if we sat in front of a whiteboard, we could make a lot more sense in a black and white way of how the world really works. And,
sure.
and maybe one day we'll do that. But right now we're just socializing ideas and constructs
right.
and theories that are closer to fact than conjecture, really.
Right. So the intent there, for those of you listening, is obviously this is a large solution without an immediate answer to it. So the only thing you can do is inform yourself. Be prepared to hear things that you're not comfortable with. Be prepared to entertain ideas that may seem conspiratorial because the mainstream media has gone out of its way to make it seem that way. Be prepared to have difficult conversations, but don't be a dick. You don't need to force anybody to believe like you believe. If you have a good product and marketing, then all you have to do is let the product speak for itself. Typically, you got to put it in front of the right person at the right time, but let the product speak for itself, and the truth will always speak for itself because people can feel it. People know when things are true and when they're not. You know, they can be brainwashed, certainly, but when they're faced with the truth later, they know what is and isn't real. They can recognize the lie once they've shed it, and the only way they're going to be able to shed it is more information that they can't ignore. So take what you've listened to here today, go look at some of these resources, go research some of these things, and we're going to keep doing shows like this to continue. I would implore you to share these ideas with people in a way that you don't teach a 3-year-old how to do multiplication tables. You teach them basic mathematics first. And while it might seem insulting to refer to just the average American going about their lives as a 3-year-old, in a social sense, with the way the world works today, they are childlike. They don't understand. They're very naive about the way things work in the world. And that's why everything seems unfair to them. Like a 3-year-old, when you take them to fucking Chuck E. Cheese or something, like, oh, we got to leave. They start crying. They have a fucking fit. It's unfair. Why should I have to leave? Because those are the hours that the store has, child. And people see some of these things and they're like, oh, that can't be true. That's stupid. Sure, from the mind of a child it is. But from the mind of someone who's actually looked into these things, when you establish 2 or 3 truths inside the theory, then it becomes like, oh, shit. Like, if that's true and that's true, then, like, if A and B are both true, then C can happen now. Like, I didn't see that connection until I knew both of those things were true. So, look into all this stuff. We'll certainly do more shows with you and in general on this topic. And we appreciate you guys tuning in today. As usual, we'll see you in hell.